Hey everybody, welcome to the 8:30 Live at 9. And as mentioned, things are incredibly busy right now. November is approaching, and honestly, just work is crazy. I don't know. It's just a lot of stuff going on. Plus, I'm doing a bunch of organizing. In fact, I'm doing civics talks. If you want to tune into one, I'm doing a version of my Real Politics 101, which has been broken up into 3 segments. 2 weeks ago was local. Next Monday, we'll be talking about state government and the Democratic State Committee and what those institutions do and how they work. And then a week after that, there will be the national level, how the federal government works. We'll probably talk a little bit about the police actions that are happening right now. Police actions, I say. But, the illegal abduction of citizens by federal police, and how the DNC National Committee, and the DNC National Convention on how the state government and state Democratic Party operate. And really, it's good for all the political parties. They all basically work the same. And then on Sunday, I'm actually doing a full presentation for a labor union, including how unions and union members can make a difference. But that's for a specific audience. So in any event, that being said, I've got a bunch of presentations to refine, and that's in addition to regular work and in addition to any organizing for November that I'd like to do. So these lives, I'm going to try to keep this to like 30 minutes or so, because there's just a tremendous amount that we have to do to ensure that we win in November. Ben, if I want to get involved in local Brooklyn politics, is there a position I should look into for 2022? Yes, for 2022, you should 100% run for county committee. And I highly recommend you're going to be in, I believe, Williamsburg, somewhere like that. You should look into the New Kings Democrats, which got its start as a political club in North Brooklyn and really has expanded borough-wide, but they're fantastic. They're reformers. They're anti-machine. They're there to help people get involved in local politics in Brooklyn. It was started sort of like when I joined Manhattan Young Democrats. I mean, when I joined Manhattan Young Democrats, we kind of took over an institution that was small but already existed. New Kings Democrats, they were also folks who were on the Obama campaign, like me and all the folks who took over Manhattan Young Democrats in 2009. But they were all on the Obama campaign as well. They were volunteers and what have you. And they went to the Brooklyn Democratic Party and said, hey, we want to get involved, And who was it? Vito Lopez, who was the Brooklyn County Chair at the time, was like, get bent. He actually said, go F yourselves. And so what they did was they decided to run a bunch of people for county committee, and they ran one person for district leader. And they actually won the district leader race, and it started a gigantic war between this group of people who just wanted to get involved and had been told to go screw themselves, and the Brooklyn Democratic Party, which has culminated now in like this protracted battle between a growing reform movement and a pretty, Brooklyn was one of the most corrupt, probably is still one of the most corrupt county parties in New York City. And it's just been this 10-year battle where the reformers have continued to gain ground. So you might remember, well, I don't know, if you followed me for a while, you might remember like 2 years ago, I live streamed the Brooklyn County meeting where some 500 people showed up in person to cast their votes and had their votes basically overruled by 1,000 proxies. So it was much closer than that. It was like 600 proxies. So this reform battle has been waged again for like 10 years. You should get involved with New Kings Democrats. They're definitely a great organization. Is Dee part of it? Deirdre. I think you mean Deirdre part of that. I don't know if Deirdre's part of that. Another organization which you could join, which is also really great and is run by some really good friends of mine, is Brooklyn Young Democrats. Now, the Young Democrats are a mixed bag because they, as part of their charter, they're official arms of the Democratic Party. And so as part of their charter, they're required to have the sign-off of their local county chair. So in the past, they've been a fair bit more constrained, and clubs move, particularly Young Democrats, move from reform to machine to insurgent to machine and all these things. And so, when I joined Manhattan, we invigorated it towards a more reform, Barack Obama grassroots model, and that slowly faded over time. Brooklyn really moved into that. Brooklyn was formed, and it was pretty aligned with the county party leadership for several years, and then it sort of got taken in a different direction by some of my friends, and now they're running folks for county committee too, and they're part of a very large coalition to engage people and push for change and, again, reform in politics. So I recommend either the Brooklyn Young Democrats or the New Kings Democrats. You're also in the district, you're probably in Emily Gallagher's district, which would have the North Brooklyn Progressive Democrats. You might like it there. They're a pretty good group. However you look at it, though, none of these folks are going to be monarchists, obviously, because they are participating in the local democratic process. All right? So Simon says hello. Hello, Simon. So those are my suggestions if you want to get involved in Brooklyn. Happy to field any other questions you might have or make connections. Again, some really great folks out there. In the news, I just wanted to cover a few things. First and foremost, and I think this is quite big, but I guess folks might have varying opinions. Mayor Lightfoot of Chicago has reached an agreement with Donald Trump for bringing in federal police agents to participate in local law enforcement. Now, this is pretty big in a lot of ways. One, it does allow Trump to save a little bit of face. So I'll say that. But two, I view it as a tremendous loss for Trump. Like, he's really had to back down. Mayor Lightfoot has been clear that, so first off, Mayor Lightfoot was one of the first mayors to say, we don't want the feds in our city if they're going to behave like this. And it was one of the cities named by Trump to which he was going to be sending 200 Border Patrol officers. Now, them having reached an agreement, Mayor Lightfoot has said that all of the federal agents will be embedded effectively into local police investigations, into criminal activities that have been taking place in Chicago. Now, Trump's entire rationale for sending any federal troops anywhere is because there's been this tremendous spree of lawlessness in all these Democratic-run cities, which, by the way, is absolutely nonsense. The crime rate, for example, in New York, although it's taken a jump over last year, is still far, far below where it was in the 90s or the 70s or 80s or any of these times. We still have record low crime rates in New York City, except for the preceding 5 or 10 year period, which was itself historically low crime. Crime dropped precipitously, and last year, so we've seen like a 46% jump in shootings over last year. Last year was the lowest crime rate in recorded history for New York City. So a 46% jump over that is like, maybe it's a lot to last year, but historically speaking, not much. So the idea that there's just chaos all over the place is completely incorrect. Although in Portland, it's a different situation, and there have been protests every night for the last couple of months, really, or really since George Floyd. So that was in May. But back to Lightfoot. So Lightfoot has been very clear that they've reached a deal to bring in federal agents to support local law enforcement, which are dealing with the surging crime in Chicago. And she was very clear that if they violate the terms of this agreement, she's going to have them kicked out. So one, it's a saving face for Trump, but ultimately I think it's a loss for him. It's a win for the rule of law. It's a win for federalism. It's a win for local elected officials and local authority and local police forces. So I'm optimistic. Although that being said, Trump continues to maintain his very, very militant rhetoric. And so I'm still pleased to say that as of 2 nights ago, I was able to get the signatures necessary to introduce a resolution into the Democratic State Committee, which we voted on August 4th, which would put the Democratic, if passed, put the Democratic Party in New York solidly behind a policy of our elected officials, and to be Democrat, de Blasio, Governor Cuomo, behind a policy for our elected leaders of using local law enforcement to investigate and stop federal agents who are violating due process and operating in an unidentified fashion. Normally, I don't really think that resolutions from the state committee or from the party mean that much in a state like New York, which is already blue, because elected officials basically, it's so solidly one party or the other that elected officials basically have no need for the backing of the party. It really only matters in like these swing districts. But in a situation like this, where the answer isn't clear, where there might be some serious contention or concern over whether to kick off a constitutional crisis, I do think that providing the political cover for something like that can actually be meaningful. You know, I was working on a resolution for police reform, and I actually want to thank Sahand, who helped write that, who really did the legwork in writing that. And I'm still trying to get the signatures and get that passed. But ultimately, resolutions like that, while it's great for the party to take a stance, I don't think it really moves the ball on legislation that much. I think it's important, again, for us to be clear about what we want, but legislation, you know, the elected officials sort of do their own political calculus. But in matters where the political calculus is so outside the box, I think it does help to have party electeds and local leaders say, yeah, we would support you in the event of XYZ. And then, of course, there's the ethics reforms, which will definitely be substantive because those will change the rules of the Democratic Party to, one, apply the ethics rules to actual state committee members and to the executive board, which they currently don't constrain, and it will add sexual misconduct and sexual harassment and sexual discrimination as things which are not tolerated by the Democratic Party within its own organization. And I think it's it was shocking to me that the state committee doesn't even mention it in their rules. It mentions racial discrimination, but nothing about gender or sex. So that'll be added. And honestly, this, I hope, will be a model for all the county parties, because none of the county parties have anything about that either. The new ethics inquiry process, though, which is now going to be, if this passes again, if it passes, will be independent from the actual party leadership. I'm very happy to say that if we manage to get this done, those processes will be made available under these rules to the county parties and to the local Democratic organizations like the clubs and the Young Democrats, so that they can avail themselves of an independent third-party arbiter in matters of ethics complaints. So, you know, there's a lot going on, and yeah, this is what I've been working on. Okay, let's see. What are the? Oh, wow, I missed some comments here. Simon Sachs, what are the chances of flipping the U.S. Senate? Does it really make sense to phone bank for senators in swing states? Well, I mean, if you look at the polls and you look at what's being said, the answer is yes. The answer, it seems to be that there is a really good chance of flipping the U.S. Senate. Donald Trump is sort of lagging in swing states, and there's the argument to be made to people. People of both parties, members of both parties, tend to like divided government, and swing voters in particular like divided government. So there's also that argument to be made that, like, whether you're voting for Donald Trump or not, you might want to put a couple of constraints on the dude by voting for the Democratic legislature. Now, polarization has really taken its toll, so preferences about divided government have undoubtedly shifted. But from what I've been seeing and what I believe, it is worthwhile to invest efforts in flipping the U.S. Senate. I think it's possible. Dorian Key, enough about the monarchist stuff. That was a different time. If this was 1820 and not 2020. What are the responsibilities and duties of the county committee? That's a great question. So the county committee, again, is the most local decision-making body of the Democratic Party, and it does three really, really important things. The first thing, which is the least important it does four really important things, and we'll go from least important to most important. The least important thing it does, in my opinion, is pass resolutions which sort of make up the platform of your local Democratic Party. Because we live in New York and everybody's a Democrat, it can be meaningful to say these things, but at the same time, all the Democratic leaders, like the elected officials, kind of know that it's a Democratic city and they've made their political calculus and don't care that much about the party's positions per se. The second thing that the county party does, which is, I guess the next three are all basically all super important. The next thing it does is the county party writes and approves the rules of the party, which also governs how the party's money is spent. And if you live in a machine county like Brooklyn or Queens or the Bronx, where the party exercises a lot of influence over who ultimately becomes an elected official, a lot of it has to do with how they spend their money and who they endorse and support. So that is really important. Corralling and controlling how the resources of the party are spent and what the rules of the party are. The second, or the third thing that the county party does, which is the second most important, is it endorses judges. And judicial delegates, which are separate from the county committee, but interact with the county committee and the district leaders, judicial delegates actually basically appoint Supreme Court judges. So there's three types of judges that we elect in New York: civil court, surrogate court, and Supreme Court. And for civil court and surrogate court, the endorsement of the county party is oftentimes tantamount to an appointment. So it's incredibly important for having a good judiciary that the county committee review and vet the people it endorses properly. Now in Manhattan, we have an entire system for this that came from the reform movement of the 1970s. Reform and good government are possible, but in other counties, it's not quite that way. So that's one of the duties of the county committee, to endorse these judicial candidates. Supreme Court, again, is actually selected. The Democratic candidate is selected by the judicial delegates, but that's a separate position from county committee. You can also run for that. And then finally, when there is a vacancy for public office, which happens far more often than you might think, the county committee selects the Democratic candidate. There is no primary. So voters have no say in the primary. And because we live in New York, Democrats pretty much always win. So the Democratic county committee of that area select who is going to take that Democratic position in the special election. So that is incredibly important. About a third of all of our elected officials come through that process at the state level, and then they sit there forever because we have something like a 90% incumbency retention rate. I say 90, 2 years. We'll see whether that trend holds. Historically speaking, over the last, say, 10 years or 20 years, we've had a 95 to 97% retention rate. So, again, we'll just have to see whether this trend of unseating people holds, and I sincerely doubt it will, honestly. Because we'll have a bunch of new people, and everybody's like, oh, the new people are fine, and then they'll sit there for 30 years. Mayor Lightfoot would make a very good VP. Interesting pick. I would say, yeah. Congrats on getting the SIGs. Well done. Thank you, Simon. You know, it's a decent amount of work. Nobody gets paid to be a state committee member, and if you want to get these things done, you know, it takes effort. I can appreciate how it is to be in the legislature trying to get these things done, but at least it's your job. Lead on with ethics reform. Also well done. Thank you. I'm actually, I'm very happy to have gotten the signatures for that. I worry that the odds of it actually being passed are quite low because, well, let's just face it. A lot of the people who are involved in the state committee have a vested interest in saving their own bacon. And ethics reforms, which, one, bring themselves under the purview of the ethics rules, and two, remove the power of adjudicating or deciding ethics complaints from the actual people in power, is very risky for folks who happen to be in power. I'm going to make a big issue of it, but it's going to be a big lift. I really think it's for the best, though, and I believe we spent a lot. I and others, attorneys and the like, spent a lot of time on these rules. And part of the package sets aside money to bring in people to consult on the rules even after they're passed, to ensure that they're as good as they can be and to make sure that we're doing everything we should be doing in terms of ethics. But yeah, it's an uphill battle when you're trying to improve accountability. But the main power of people on these committees, county, state, and national, are these rules that constrain the power and the ability to abuse power of the folks who happen to be in charge. Ben, what can we do to ensure election security accuracy in 2020? This is a tough one. I mean, New York is actually pretty bad on election laws. So one of the big things to do is make sure that our systems here in New York are actually robust and protected. And that comes down to our local board of elections and our local elected officials. And there's a role for everybody here, because boards of elections are done at the county level, and there's a state board of elections. And we really need, we need new legislation passed. And we need, as part of that legislation, a budget passed which allocates money for election security and handling these mail-in ballots. And we also actually need the mail-in, what was it? Vote by mail, but not vote by mail. What's it? Absentee ballot. We need the absentee ballot rules, which were applied to the Democratic primary, to be applied to the November general election, so that people can, in fact, vote by mail. You might think that we can because we did it during the primary, but those rules have not really been extended to the general, and we really need that. So we need both the extension of those rules to make vote by mail easier, and we need resources allocated and a better process for dealing with the mail-in ballots, because we actually just certified the results of state elections or the primary elections this week, and the primary was held in June, and it's July. So it would not be fun to have to wait until, depending on your state, July, August. November, December, maybe even early January, to know whether or not Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. That being said, we have very little control over what other states do. And we also have very little control over whether Donald Trump will contest those results and try to stay in office by contesting them and saying that there is no legitimate reason for him to leave office. That's the most dangerous, of course. But in terms of election security, there's, I guess, three things you can do. One is contact your local legislators here in New York to do something about New York. Contact our federal legislators to do something about the federal situation, although the Senate will likely block any reforms. And then the third is to work with organizations like Stacey Abrams' organization to do voter protection, straight up voter protection. A lot of election security this year, I think, is going to come down to voter security, making sure that there's no voter intimidation, making sure that there's no funny business at the polls, making sure that ballots are actually counted, that they are delivered, that we are tracking requests for vote by mail, that we're tracking people who submit vote by mail, that we're watching the opening of all of these ballots. And that's going to take a volunteer force. That's going to take attorneys who are ready to do pro bono work. And it's going to take money. So those are sort of the three things that we can do to help participate in securing our elections for 2020. And that might be unfulfilling. Like, it might not seem like it's enough. Well, the volunteering stuff, like election day stuff, is quite big. Voter protection and all that is, I think, quite a big deal. But But really, we need the government to take elections seriously, and they simply don't. And good government folks like me have been, talking about how we need to spend millions more, which is nothing, by the way. Millions is nothing to the government. Millions more on elections, and nobody cared. And suddenly 2020 or 2016 rolls around and it's like, oh, wow, why are elections so crappy in the United States? It's because we've been disinvesting from elections for, 50 years. Simon Sachs, yes, Stacey Abrams. Also, I would add in New York notification process for ballots that were not counted. Yes. Thank you, Ben. You're welcome, Simon. It would be great if they told everybody whose ballot was not counted, if they mailed them back and said, your ballot wasn't counted, and put the onus on the Board of Elections to pursue voters instead of having affidavit ballots. When you cast an affidavit ballot, you're basically saying, I'm going to come and prove that I'm a voter after the fact. And people, they don't follow up on that or what have you. But the problem with that is it drastically drags out the time for counting ballots, because people were arguing about whether a ballot should be counted again up until this week when we got our final counts. And you can only imagine that if they then had decided all these ballots are disqualified and then mailed all those people this week, that then they would have to extend that by maybe 2 weeks so that people could respond to that piece of mail. Then you had another week for the recount on that, and now you're another month out from the election results. And in a primary, maybe that doesn't matter so much because the primary is not to November, and we've June, July, August, September, October, 5 months in between. But for the federal election, the general election in November, the election's in early November, but you've got sort of November, you've got half a month, November, December, and then half of January. So that's maybe 3 months until you have to seat the new president and the new legislature. And for the legislature, it's a little less important, but transitioning from one president to the other is quite a production. So, that does create some difficulties unless again, we have a much better streamlined process for bringing in these absentee ballots, which could be done. But it doesn't seem like, we'll see what the legislature does, I suppose. In any event, we're now at 30 minutes. We're out of comments. And this has been bunches of fun. So what's tomorrow? Friday? So I'll see you tomorrow at 9. And then, we'll take the weekend off and be back on Monday. So until tomorrow, good seeing you. Bye-bye.